The Pennsylvania Game Commission is responsible for the state's wild birds and wild mammals. The Game Commission has successfully recovered several species, some by way of reintroduction. Our mission is to manage Pennsylvania's wild birds, wild mammals, and their habitats for current and future generations. There are currently 29 state-threatened and endangered species. 9 are mammals, and 20 are birds. Join us on our journey, a path fueled by passion and persistence, sometimes riddled with heartache. But often joy is the fruit of our success as we learn from our never-ending teacher that is our natural world. This native species is rarely seen by anyone. Most people don't know they even exist. Yet this small mammal, inextricably tied to the American chestnut, has been in decline for at least the past 40 years. Usually active in total darkness, and in some of the most difficult terrain found in Pennsylvania, the Allegheny woodrat clings to existence.
About 6 years ago, began implementing an emergency recovery action just to try to keep the species extant, to try to prevent the species from going extinct, and to try to prevent the species from being federally listed before it completely winked out.
The landscape level, things have definitely changed, where we see a lot more roads, farms in the valleys have really increase the amount of distance that is not quality habitat for the woodrats between actual rock habitat outcrops. And so it's harder for them to get from one place to another.
So when we have man-made barriers that prevent Allegheny woodrats from moving between habitat patches, we can lose the opportunity for these individuals to exchange genetic material. In other words, we see decreases in gene flow. With these decreases in gene flow, we see decreases in genetic variability, and those can correspond with negative effects of inbreeding.
Raccoons carry a roundworm in their gut that can lead to a population picking up this disease, and they're not the intended host of that parasite, and so it reacts differently inside that woodrat and ends up causing them to die.
Wildlife recovery requires a lot of strategy. We are digging deep into the main drivers of decline and target what caused the decline of the species in the first place. So from an outside perspective, it can sometimes look like we're throwing things at the wall. But in reality, each of those strategies are specifically designed to target a driver of decline.
The fact that we only caught females yesterday was a little bit concerning, so I'm hoping to see some males today. Or at least some like younger rats to show that there has been some reproduction in this core area, because then it's more likely that we just miss. And I wonder why I go home covered in pee. You want to see her up close and personal? Yeah. Big whiskers, plenty of toes. We got ear tags, tucked further down on the ears so that they hopefully don't impede anything and are less likely to get ripped out. And that tail.
Yeah.
Bicolored furred tail that's the telltale for
what I was not expecting, I think.
Yeah.
There's a lot of what we're working on that can be applied to so many different other conservation actions being applied all over the world.
Just to be able to lay eyes on a live woodrat and, actually see what we're trying to save, it really does make the project more meaningful. Being able to help with the trapping and see that from one year to the next, we actually did catch more woodrat in this last trapping attempt than we did the year before, so that's encouraging. The word rat doesn't really do them any justice, because at least to me, they don't look anything really like a rat.
The old world rats, or the black and brown rat, have what's called a naked tail. So they have that long tail with no hair on it. The woodrat in North America is more like a squirrel in that it has a fully furred tail. Now the hairs are not very long, but it is a fully furred tail, and that distinguishes it from the other rats.
Allegheny woodrats aren't even in the same genus as the black or brown rat that we commonly think of when we think of rats.
The woodrats do have long whiskers. If you're crawling around through all of these rocks deep down where it's dark all day long, you have to be able to navigate through there. And so the whiskers are very sensitive, and they help them navigate through the small spaces between all these tight rocks. So we are here today at the site where the very first Allegheny woodrat was ever discovered by Spencer Fullerton Baird in 1857. Other species that are now extirpated were also found alongside the woodrat in Carlisle Cave, such as wolf, elk, lynx, and panthers.
How or why woodrats lived in this cave is unknown, but the species once persisted in caves throughout the range.
The main cave is on the bank of a creek, nearly on level with the water, the entrance being 10 feet high. Here, I obtained some of my specimens, which were generally embedded in the floor of the cave.
Spencer Fullerton Baird became a professor at Dickinson College and then went on to become the first curator of the Smithsonian Institute.
While today we mostly find woodrats on talus slopes and other surface rock throughout Pennsylvania, we do have records of them living in caves throughout the state. The specimen found here was a fossilized jaw, and years later was noted to be much larger than other woodrat specimens collected.
Historically, Neotoma magister was thought to be a subspecies of Neotoma floridana, which is found in the southeastern portion of the U.S. In the 90s and early 2000s, some mitochondrial work was done that indicated that the two groups, so Neotoma floridana and Neotoma magister, were really distinct evolutionary lineages. So these two groups, floridana and magister, were acknowledged as separate species in 2003.
Sometimes there can be slight differences between species, and oftentimes it now takes the advanced techniques of genetics to actually say, hey, they don't just look alike, they're also genetically unique.
Allegheny woodrats are kind of unique because they are not social. In fact, they're pretty territorial. They have a home range or a core area that they will defend from other woodrats, except for particular times of the year when it's beneficial for breeding season. We know that they're nocturnal, so they're mostly active at night. And woodrats do not hibernate over the winter. They're active year-round. Because of that, they're really reliant on whatever food sources are available to them in each season. That means for the winter seasons, they spend much of their time in late summer and fall collecting foods that will be stable in the rocks over the winter. So foods like hard mass, like
acorns, hickory nuts, and also they dry vegetation and dry fungi and stash them into the rocks, and they form what we call a cache that they can then use to feed themselves over the winter.
And so we call these boulder bunny bundles. So they'll take the fern and to get it back into the crevices of the rocks, they kind of, see if I can get it unraveled, they'll bite a little piece of it, bend it, and form, a bundle. So they take the fern frond and bite it here, and there, and just kind of hold it up. And, on trail camera, you'll see them just carrying it in their mouth back to into these tight crevices.
Tend to think of them as like little ecosystem engineers, where they're constantly fiddling with things out there within their foraging area. So as an example, in these rocks, there's not a lot of nutrients that get in there, but they're pack rats. And so they're hauling in pieces of bark and leaves and seeds, and they have latrine sites. And so they're able to bring nutrients underground. And 100+ years ago, this is the type of area where American chestnuts thrived. And so for them to get started, those wood rats were probably hauling seeds underground and caching those for the winter. And if that wood rat happened to perish, then that's how those seeds would probably germinate, and they would use some of that decaying nutrients from their old food caches in order to get started. Wood rats are also doing things outside of the rock as well. I kind of think of them as like little tree farmers. For example, if a wood rat were to be out in the springtime where the maples are getting ready to produce their seeds, the wood rats can climb in the tree and nip off a branch. And then the remaining part of that branch, the seeds, will actually get about 25% larger. With the oak trees, the wood rats can climb in the trees and they can remove the acorns infested by weevils and other insect pests. And that allows more nutrients then to get into the good acorns. And so they're doing the same thing, producing more viable food for themselves as well as other species. And so they're playing roles that are hard to describe, but they're important to the ecosystem.
Every species within a given ecosystem or community plays an important role, and the Allegheny woodrat is certainly no exception to that. And the Allegheny woodrat is really closely tied to the Appalachian Mountains. This is a species that's found here in these rocks and nowhere else on Earth. Allegheny woodrats are known for their pack rat behaviors. They are in the woods and they're collecting their foods to build their cache, but along their travels, they also collect other stuff that they find that they think is interesting. They have a tendency to collect shiny things like candy wrappers or shotgun shells. There's even been stories of diamond rings and sunglasses. And sometimes they collect other natural artifacts like bones or feathers or snake skins too. So we find these things shoved back deep in cracks in the rock. We don't really know what for. They're just collecting. They're pack rats.
If they're bringing in a lot of plants and foods and shaping that habitat around them that other species depend on, then they have a really important role to those other species. And so we often call them a keystone species. There's a lot of things that are going on that we can see in those manners, but it's quite possible that they're playing a role that we don't even understand yet. The three big threats for wood rats are the food hypothesis, or the lack of food out there for them, the disease aspect, so the raccoon roundworm, and then also the fragmentation, where you have these populations that become isolated, and then you have genetic issues that follow suit with that. The food hypothesis, the thinking behind that is that American chestnuts were really large, old-growth trees, and they produce a very consistent crop of nuts.
Potentially even 1 in 4
trees on the landscape was an American chestnut. So the loss of that species has impacted many other species and has really changed the landscape.
When those chestnuts went away, now we are seeing the acorns or the oak trees move in, and woodrats relying on this food resource that is not consistent year to year. That makes it harder for woodrats to have large populations in these habitats. And when there's not a large number of individuals here, there's a lower pressure to disperse from them and get to other places. And so they persist in these habitats, but they're not doing overly well. This core habitat will have less individuals, and over time that results in more inbreeding and more negative genetic impacts. And so we've actually seen in New Jersey where the genetic pool was getting so small that individuals were being born without toes on their feet. So we called that clubfoot. We were able to alleviate that by bringing in some Pennsylvania woodrats to New Jersey and bring that heterozygosity, which is the genetic term for how much variation is in their gene pool, and bring that back up. +100 years ago, when Pennsylvania was basically 100% forested, and the predators were likely different then too. We had cougars that were hunting deer, and now they're gone, and what we have is a lot of fragmentation. These trails that we're on here today, or the open agricultural areas, those are creating a lot more areas for raccoons and foxes that hunt edges.
Habitat fragmentation and loss has led to genetic diversity issues where we have individuals that are sort of trapped in a pocket of suitable habitat and have nowhere else to go. And that can sometimes lead to inbreeding, but can certainly lead to issues with low genetic diversity and lack of population growth.
The challenges for dispersal for woodrats is kind of twofold. One of them is the natural aspect of it, which is predation from owls and foxes and raccoons. In this type of habitat, they can move very quickly between these rocks, and woodrats know their way around, whereas a predator is going to have a much harder time getting into these spaces. So they do really well here. Once they leave here, they're out in the open. That's where owls or foxes can pick them off and chase them down a lot easier. And then the other problem is what humans have done to the landscape. If the next habitat is on the next mountain over, and there's a huge valley full of homes and farms and highways, that woodrat is not only out in the wide open trying to dodge all of these predators, but then it has to know how to get across those roads and then make it to the other side of the mountain where there's available habitat. If the rock habitat is within 2 kilometers of an edge or a trail, it's more likely to be extirpated by the raccoon, roundworm, and other stressors. They're going to find access into these remote rocky habitats a lot easier.
One of the other drivers of Allegheny woodrat decline is disease, and specifically we've really keyed in on a particular parasite called the raccoon roundworm. It's an intestinal parasite that's carried by raccoons and deposited in their feces. And then when other mammals come into contact with that feces, they can become infected by the parasite. It's not problematic for raccoons, it lives in the intestinal tract, but it has a tendency to migrate from the intestinal tract to the nervous system in non-raccoon mammals. and woodrats stumble upon those seed-filled feces, they have a tendency to collect the feces because they are pack rats, after all. For the woodrat, this means that they're especially prone to picking up this particular parasite that is almost always fatal for them. Raccoon roundworm eggs that are in those feces are very hardy in the environment and can persist for several years after they've been deposited. And that means that if a woodrat brings inoculated feces into their cache or into their rocks, then they are potentially not only inoculating themselves with that parasite, but also any individuals that might come after them.
It was in the mid-'80s when the declines to the Allegheny woodrat were really noticed. And it was actually petitioned to be federally endangered and deemed not warranted because the southern half of the species population was still doing really, really well. And at that time, there was still a population or two in New York, there were several in New Jersey, and a bunch in Ohio. It was in that mid-'80s when Pennsylvania listed the Allegheny as state threatened. Since that time, we've seen declines in most of these states, from West Virginia north, to the point where they're gone in some states, or there's just one or two single remaining populations. And now here we are 40 years later, and now we're looking at a 70% decline. And we're down to just a few really good core areas that we want to try and stabilize as our first step. And from there, we can try and build out and recover on a broader scale from there. There's a really diverse amount of foods that they eat. Being herbivores, there's a lot of soft mass like berries. Berries don't stick around very long, so you know they're going to eat them when they're ripe. We know that they eat acorns and chestnuts and maple seeds, and they pick a lot of vegetation, green leaves from a whole host of different species. And they will dry them in these rocks, and once they're dry, haul them back deep into the rocks where they'll maintain that dryness, and that's building up their food cache for the winter.
We recently started taking a closer look at Allegheny woodrat diet, and to do that, we worked with our partners at Towson University. So far, the data that we've collected is pretty preliminary. We're just starting to scratch the surface on this.
Okay, so there's a latrine back in here, and you can see the really distinctly black and shiny pellets.
But basically what we did is we collected fecal samples from Allegheny woodrats, and we trapped them, and also from their latrines, because in the rocks that they live in, they have a tendency to deposit their feces in a pile. We collected fresh fecal samples, and we preserved those, sent those to our partners at Towson University, where they extracted the DNA from those samples, and then used a genetic library to identify the components of the fecal samples.
What was surprising to us was that there was a high diversity of mushrooms. A lot of protein actually comes out of mushrooms, and so they're a highly desired food item.
They just really eat a little bit of everything, which is what we would expect of a species that is suffering from decreased food availability. And so they're eating a little bit of everything to stay alive.
As we try some of these different management actions, we're looking to see what kind of impact they have. And that's helping us determine whether that action is viable and what threat it's really truly addressing.
I grew up outside with my parents, hunting, fishing, hiking.
I knew from a very young age that I wanted to work with animals.
I think the thing that got me interested in wildlife conservation was the first project I was on, where I actually got to do some behavioral research looking at squirrels and how they cached acorns and how that impacted forest growth.
I love the field of conservation genetics. I love doing work that is intellectually challenging that it is going to support a species in its persistence in our very rapidly changing world.
And I honestly never knew that wildlife conservation was a career field that I could even get paid to do something in. I was really fortunate to stumble upon a really great mentor, and it helped me figure out my passion and my drive, which is conserving wildlife.
And then from there, it kind of blossomed into just really wanting to protect rare species or rare habitats.
And know that potentially what we learn can influence management decisions.
It's easy to get people to be excited about the big cool things, but something like the Allegheny woodrat, where you're like, oh, it's a rat, being able to then really have those conversations with people and just being able to help people see, the uniqueness and the reasons they should be excited about some of those smaller animals is really what drives me.
At first, it just seems like another job, but then you start realizing how much of a difference you're actually making. It might take years, but you can see the results of what you're doing. You'll see the animals using the habitat you've created. There's a lot of satisfaction in what we do.
Just the amount of stuff that we can really learn from the species with our setup is really helpful to the biologist and the species as a whole.
This is a very unique project. It's multifaceted and it involves a lot of different people. It's just a unique thing for us to be able to help a species that's struggling, possibly stabilize or increase a population of a threatened species here in the county, and reintroduce the species back to this game land. It's just a unique and different thing that we've enjoyed so far, and we've learned a lot. To be honest, until I came to work for the Game Commission, I didn't even know woodrats existed. Just bringing the species back to this game land is pretty special. This game land probably hasn't seen in a very long time, and normally we're doing things for turkeys, deer, bear, small game, and this is just a lot different. And that it's a threatened species in the state makes us feel like we're making a difference.
None of this work would be possible without all of the people that show up to work in this really not very friendly environment. People show up with a smile on their face and hike a mile or two, and then they show up the next year with a smile on their face again, and they just keep doing it. And it's people from all sorts of different backgrounds, and they're just so inspiring. The people surrounding this project are what make it. It's great. Gosh, even if you're having a bad day, there's no way that you can see that and not just take a breath and enjoy it.
This is what I would call one column. This whole rock.
We began carrying in chestnuts and sometimes acorns to the Allegheny Woodrat sites. And we would gather a team full of people who distributed the nuts deep into the rocks. Our recent diet work has shown that we've been pretty successful. We found that 100% of the samples that we collected over the winter did contain chestnut DNA. So that was a really exciting finding for us, and also exciting for all of the people who have spent hours carrying chestnuts on their backs. We've also seen really great success in this emergency action in not only keeping the species extant and preventing federal listing, but we've also seen populations increase from just 2 to 3 individuals to nearly 30 in 5 or 6 years, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when we have a species where one female is often just producing 1 pup each year,
a growth of 2 to 3 individuals to 20 to 30 is huge. We've also seen evidence that females are having more than just one litter of one pup in a given year. So we're seeing that this driver of decline, this lack of food, is a really serious problem for the Allegheny woodrat. And we're finding hope in the fact that this emergency action is helping the species. Of course, it also poses a lot of new questions like, where do we go from here? How do we make this a long-term recovery response instead of a short-term emergency action to prevent extinction?
Our goals are to prevent them from getting worse, to prevent them from being listed. When species get all the way down to the point where they're in a really critical spot, that is where the costs and the amount of effort really go up and really get much higher. And so it's cheaper and easier if we can address these issues before they become severe.
For at least the past 8 years, we have been working within the state and also with other states to translocate individuals. So we've picked up individuals at one site and moved them to another site where we release them in the hopes that they'll spread some of their genetic information into that population and help to support the population into the future. This gets really tricky because we have a lot of populations with low genetic diversity, and we also have a lot of populations that don't have many individuals left in them. So it becomes difficult to warrant removing an individual from a population and taking them to another population. This is really the driver that led to the Allegheny Woodrat Captive Breeding Program, which is an initiative that's been started by the Allegheny Woodrat Working Group, a collective of states throughout the range of the species and zoos, universities, and other nonprofit organizations who are interested in Allegheny woodrat conservation and are actively working to save the species.
When the Allegheny Woodrat Working Group reached out, I was really lucky. The zoo jumped right on board with me with wanting to support this project. It really fits with one of our core conservation missions of being able to use the zoo expertise to help a native mammal. So the Maryland Zoo's role in the breeding program is to create offspring so that we can put them back out into the wild to help the genetics for the Allegheny woodrat. When we get a new woodrat in, the Maryland Zoo's policy is that we do a 30-day quarantine period, which is actually really important for these animals that are coming from the wild. So during that time frame, we do a full vet exam and then check them for internal and external parasites, make sure overall that they look good, and then continue to track them and make sure within that period that we don't come up with any type of diseases that could be a risk to the rest of the zoo's collection and or to that individual. So really just trying to make sure that they're good and healthy so that we can get them into the breeding program.
Everybody stayed nice and dry, and I wouldn't be surprised if we get some new rats tomorrow, too.
Yeah, I think
In order to trap Allegheny woodrats, we know that they're nocturnal, so they're mostly active at night. So we come out in the evening, right before the sun's going down, and we set live traps. We try to find a nice ledge in the rocks, somewhere that will be safe from weather. And we bait the traps with apples and peanut butter, because woodrats can't resist peanut butter. And leave them open and come back first thing in the morning and check all of the traps to see if we've managed to capture any Allegheny woodrats.
If we've been lucky enough to capture an Allegheny woodrat, we want to make sure we record some data and information about that individual. We start by getting the individual out of the trap, getting a weight on the individual, determining the sex, determining their reproductive status.
All right, she's 345.
You got it, wow. I use it more.
I expect.
We mark each individual woodrat with unique IDs on ear tags. And so we can tell if we've captured an individual before or not based off of the presence or absence of those ear tags.
That one or you want the other one? I can give you either. Whichever's going to be easy.
We also collect a small piece of tissue from the ear for a genetic sample, and that will go to our partners at Towson University, who help to document the population genetics and the genetic diversity at a site. And we've also recently been collecting some fecal samples to take a closer look at diet. After we've collected all of the information and recorded everything that we might need from that individual, we then let the individual go. And we try to do this as quickly as possible to reduce stress and time in handling as much as possible.
I saw that on.
So it was a great opportunity for me to go out with the biologists in Pennsylvania to go trap woodrats. And that was really an exciting adventure for me to really just see the woodrat's actual habitat. Because obviously, like, we had seen pictures and I kind of had an idea. But one of the things that we really wanted to do, especially for the juveniles that were going to go back out into the wild, was set up their space to closely mimic where they would end up going. So just being able to see it and understand the scale of their environment and just how hard and complex it is for people to get around.
I remember you being out with us.
The week that I was out, they also had some of the forestry guys with them as well. And that was really interesting to just hear the different conversations between the different departments, all within Pennsylvania, trying to figure out how they were going to work together to support the woodrats. At about day 50, we definitely knew it was time to pull the juvenile woodrats from their mom. They were 215 grams, and the biologists say that a woodrat's an adult at 225 grams. In 50 days, they were almost adult size, so it was a lot of rat. Then when we separated them into their independent housing, one of the things we really wanted to be able to do was make sure that they could figure out how to survive on their own. So then when we moved them, we also ended up putting radio collars on all 3 of them. We also did a vet exam and sexed them, and just generally wanted to make sure that they were healthy. And then the biologist would show up the day that they were going to take them out, and we loaded them into caging for them, and then they got put into the soft release cages out in the wild.
The Allegheny Woodrat Working Group works together to determine where individuals produced as part of the captive breeding program will be released into the wild. And this is really often based upon which populations are most in need of genetic diversity and which areas have received additional recovery work to help support the species in that location.
My lab at Towson University, which includes graduate students, undergraduate researchers, and myself, use molecular tools to inform management of threatened species. In practice, this means we can use DNA extracted from scat samples to infer the diet of Allegheny woodrats.
This is our Taq polymerase that I'm about to add. This is the workhorse of our reaction.
We can describe genetic variability across the woodrat range, and this allows us to target populations that may be suffering from decreased genetic variability and effects of inbreeding.
We collected DNA samples from those juveniles so that way she'll be able to track and see whether those animals are successful in breeding in the wild populations when they get out there.
Based off of the life cycle of the raccoon roundworm parasite, we know that most eggs are deposited in raccoon feces in late summer and into the fall. And so to combat this driver of decline in Allegheny woodrats, we have been placing anti-helminth baits. It's just like a deworming medicine or a dewormer that you would give to your dog or cat. We've been placing these on the landscape in passive dispensers. The medicine is contained in a fish meal bait so that it's particularly stinky and attractive to raccoons. And we place these on the landscape in close proximity to the Allegheny woodrat colonies that we're trying to protect. The goal there is just to deworm the raccoons, especially in that summer to fall time period when those individuals are most likely to be depositing eggs in their feces.
Another issue that comes into play is there is a decrease in gene flow between isolated populations. And this may ultimately contribute to decreased genetic variability or loss of genetic variability.
Increasing connectivity is definitely a management action that we can employ. We can help make that dispersal more guided. But if we make piles of rock to help guide them when they do disperse, then that provides them periodic areas of safety. If we build several of these close to the existing habitat, that can potentially boost that population up so we have a larger carrying capacity and a better genetic profile on that species.
Building rock corridors between isolated habitat patches encourages natural dispersal of Allegheny woodrats from one patch to another and encourages gene flow.
We've been working closely with our habitat crews and foresters to make sure that there are routes that Allegheny woodrats can take to get from one metapopulation to another in order to make sure that genes can be spread widely and we can avoid inbreeding.
Being the last place that we are aware of in the Northeast region that has woodrats, the pressure is kind of on us to keep expanding, and the way the mountains lie here, we can possibly get them on other ridge tops. It's possible that they could expand there on their own if we do our part right. This location, it's in fairly close proximity to where the known colony of woodrats is at present time. There was already chestnuts planted here. Oak trees will supplement the chestnuts for them. But we had done a cutting here, and it came back in a bunch of blackberry, raspberry, pokeweed, so we knew that the soft mast would be here. And we had decent access to the site in order to get the rock in to help bolster the habitat. The chestnuts were a big part of the decision to come here.
Pennsylvania is really quite a good place to be a woodrat. Across the state, the mass majority of populations have higher genetic variability than what we see in other states. This is very likely due to the multiple high-quality habitat patches and all the hard work on the part of the Pennsylvania Game Commission to manage that habitat.
This type of habitat, it's going to be good for things like you're definitely going to get mice and chipmunks and things like that roaming around in these rocks. That, of course, is going to bring in fishers, bobcats. The plantings that we're going to be doing with all the soft mast and hard mast trees and things, that's going to influence a lot of different birds and, of course, deer. Chestnuts, the bear love chestnuts, turkeys love chestnuts. So it's going to definitely benefit more than just woodrats.
Our work on the ground has varied a lot. We've worked on building rock habitat in between existing patches of rock habitat to really make sure that we are connecting the dots. We've also come through and done habitat work in those areas, thinking about a productive, healthy forest that's going to provide cover and provide food to support Allegheny woodrat populations that are moving through those areas. And as an added bonus, it will be providing food and cover for many other species as well. We've also had work where we take rock and bolster the complexity of the rock in a given area to make sure there are the cave-like spaces that Allegheny woodrats need to survive. And that again is going to benefit many other species. Several species of greatest conservation need, like rock shrews and rock bulls and small-footed bats and timber rattlesnakes, rely on these same habitat types. And other more well-known species like the grouse also benefit from the habitats that we're creating in these areas.
The main staple of their diet for us is actually a commercial chinchilla chow. We actually gave some of the chinchilla chow to the Pennsylvania biologists, and they put it out, and the wild woodrats really enjoyed it as well. So it's been a great tool for us to be able to transition the woodrats from the zoo into the wild, which has been, a really nice transition. We've been able to pair that then with some of the native fruits and browse that they'll also come across in the wild to really set them up for when they get back out into their habitat.
I'm excited to see, once we do actually bring woodrats onto the site, how they react and how they settle into the new environment, and see how we need to change our habitat work in the future. We're constantly learning, and we'd see how they're using the habitat we've created, how we can better that habitat. That's the great thing about our job, is nothing is set in concrete, and we can change things to make them better and learn from our mistakes.
Several Allegheny woodrats found themselves in a nuisance situation in Virginia. A landowner, luckily, was able to identify the species and contacted Virginia's Wildlife Agency. Several individuals were trapped by Virginia's Wildlife Agency, and the Allegheny Woodrat Working Group decided that those individuals would be given to the state of Pennsylvania to help benefit our Allegheny woodrat populations. We decided that the individuals needed to be moved to a historic site that was not in super close proximity to other existing Allegheny woodrat sites. We ultimately ended up performing the first reintroduction of Allegheny woodrats in the state of Pennsylvania and brought Allegheny woodrats back to a historic site in the northwest region of the state for the first time in many years. Based on our historical surveys, we know that the Allegheny woodrat was missing from the northwest portion of Pennsylvania for at least 30 to 40 years, but it's likely that they were missing even before that time period. We just don't have the surveys to document.
So I guess we'll head that way to start with, get that rat out, then we'll meet up with Tim, and then we'll keep going that way to the rest of the enclosures. Tim has 5, so there's one more.
I'm the driver and the note taker today.
So she's 350 grams. They get bigger than this, but she's a nice chunky adult female. We have 3 adult females going out, 1 juvenile female going out.
2 happy males.
And 2 happy males that are gonna help make babies, we hope. And those big old whiskers to help them navigate in the rocks.
In the dark.
In the dark, yeah. Yep.
Northwest rock chinchilla.
Here she is. Number 1.
So when we do move those individuals, whether they're translocated individuals from one wild population to another or individuals born in captivity back out to the wild, we use a soft release technique. Basically what this means is that we don't just open up a trap and release them into the wild and tell them to go be free, but instead we place them into a soft release enclosure and we provide them with plentiful food and water. We let them sit in that environment for a few days before they're actually released. Our hope is that this gives them a chance to start to acclimate to the weather patterns at that particular site, start to hear some of those natural noises, predators, and also competitors on the landscape, and really help them to adjust to the new setting that they are about to be released into.
This is 638 and a female.
Subadult.
Yeah, it doesn't look like she's ever fed anything. And she's actively pooping for the camera. Oh, those are funky looking.
Yeah, got some cherries
Good
too.
kind. Oh, awesome.
Yeah. They talked about putting some nails in too if you want to.
Yeah. What a feast.
We monitor with game cameras as well. We keep an eye on what other individuals or species might be coming to visit that particular woodrat that's about to be released. And we can also sometimes catch glimpses of the woodrats themselves after they've been released, coming back to the site of their release. We provide supplemental food even after the woodrats are released into the wild. We want to make sure that we are supporting them as much as possible and doing everything that we can to increase their chance of survival, especially for those first few weeks after they've been released. That can be the hardest for them to establish a territory, start to build their nest and build their cache, and to learn where their food is coming from in this new place. So we provide plentiful food in the first few weeks to make sure that we're helping to smooth that transition.
Yeah, the last one's pretty cool.
Pretty spectacular looking.
All right, 310.
I like those whiskers right there.
All right, I think we're good.
Ready? Oh, you're right there.
Looking out.
Ah. There's the bitey end. Ow, ow.
Tail.
Glad I had that leather glove on.
Those two feisty ones, they're the survivors.
Even after we open the door of that soft release enclosure, we leave the enclosure on the landscape with the door open for several weeks after the release.
Yeah, she's had a litter before.
Allowing the individual to come back to their nest box and collect those materials to take them deep into the rocks to get a head start on building their nest. And also allowing them to come back and retrieve any food that still remained in the soft release enclosure when we open the door. We're excited to continue monitoring the population and supporting the population to establish a healthy metapopulation in that part of the state.
In the future, our plan is to keep going out along the top of this ridge and get more of this rock structure built for them, get more of the hard and soft mass, more chestnuts, so that they can expand. Because the population isn't going to expand if we don't expand the habitat. So this is a long-term project that we're in for the long haul, and it's going to take several years, but it's definitely worth it to save a threatened species.
Pennsylvania has the majority of the woodrats left in the northern part of the species range. Based on our annual trapping and surveys at known woodrat sites throughout the state of Pennsylvania, we anticipate that there are roughly 300 to 500 of them left in the state. Species recovery can be pretty complex because often there are multiple contributing factors that are leading to the decline of the species. We have to address all of those drivers of decline in order to truly start to recover the species and reverse those declines that we're seeing and start to recover the species.
There are still some unanswered questions. We're very interested in knowing more about the caloric and the nutritional profiles of these different dietary items. We'd like to know more about whether things like invasive species that these wood rats are feeding on are actually meeting their nutritional needs, or whether they're simply eating them because plant species that they preferred and were present historically have been lost from the environment. Every species on our planet is part of an ecosystem, and an ecosystem provides services that we depend on. For example, a natural wetland can much less expensively filter and clean our water. A natural forest ecosystem can clean our air, which again, we depend on. And they can do that much less expensively than we can do it directly. Allegheny woodrats are important parts of their ecosystem. They are seed dispersers, they contribute to forest decomposition, they are parts of their food web. Anytime we lose a species, we're essentially playing a bit of Russian roulette. We are crossing our fingers that losing that particular species is not going to destabilize the ecosystem so much that it interferes with the ecosystem services that we depend on.
We often say, not on our watch. Our goal is to prevent species loss, to make sure that we do retain diversity.
There's a lot of what we're working on that can be applied to so many different other conservation actions being applied all over the world.
From an ecosystem perspective or a community perspective, losing this species in this particular landscape is going to impact all of the other species of the community. Losing a species is punching a hole in the connectedness of everything. One great thing that the Allegheny woodrat in particular has going for it when we're thinking about trying to prevent the species from becoming listed federally and trying to prevent the species from becoming extinct is that there's this great network of people across many states, many fields, and across many different types of institutions that are all working collectively to jump in and take actions and work together to make sure that the species does not get listed and does not go extinct. Because ultimately, when we're out here trapping and we get to see the species and we get to see the individuals that are still alive because of the work that we've done, it's really rewarding to see that what we're doing every day makes a difference, even though sometimes it means that we don't sleep at night. Certainly, if we just think on it a little bit longer, we'll be able to put the pieces together. It's on.
There's a lot you can do for native species in general and for woodrats in particular. Support the return of the American chestnut. Support healthy deer management, which in turn supports healthy forests and all species of wildlife and plant life. Plant native species in your garden. Once established, they require little maintenance or watering. As part of the bigger picture, discourage forest fragmentation, especially deep forest and sensitive habitats. Keep ridgetop forests intact, where mature trees sequester carbon dioxide and where woodrats are typically found.